Last year, our institute was contacted by the parents of this patient who suffers from intellectual disability. They have seen several other clinical geneticists, but nobody was able to establish the correct diagnosis. We were lucky because some diagnoses were already ruled out, and we finally were able to get the correct diagnosis. However, after we found the correct diagnosis, we heard of a tool that just uses the image of the patient to suggest differential diagnosis, and we checked this patient on the tool. We were surprised to see that the correct diagnosis, which is Morwich-Wilson syndrome, was ranked to position 1 by that tool. And I note we do not enter a single feature of the patient, it's just the image. So we wondered, how is this possible? The technology, which is called facial dysmorphology novel analysis technology, identifies and measures the patterns in a 2D patient image. It compares those data to the syndrome mask, which is built from a large training set based on the London Dysmorphology database. How do you use the tool? So you can upload your image, so the image of your patient, to the tool, and then the computer will detect the face on that image. It will localize facial feature points. There are 130 of these points, and from these points it will estimate the local biometrical information of the patient. This can then be compared to syndrome masks. For example, in this case, which is a patient who has Stickler syndrome, the tool will compare the 2D image to a syndrome mask of that syndrome. And it will inform you about the similarity by a heat map. So where it's rather reddish, it's more similar. Where it's rather bluish, it's less similar. This similarity information is also summarized in a phenometer. When you perform a principal component analysis on the annotated features of syndromic patients with and without Gestalt syndrome, the most discriminatory features are depressed nasal bridge and brachycephaly. However, FDNA highlights the eyes of the patient, which might be a feature that is not noted by the clinician or where we don't even have a term to describe it. So, what was the aim of our study? We wanted to evaluate the performance of the FDNA algorithm. To do so, we uploaded more and more patients, and we started with an easy case. So this patient has trichorhinophalangeal syndrome, which is easy to recognize for a clinician, and the tool as well recognized the correct diagnosis on rank 1. We also tested on this patient who has Rockman-Thompson syndrome, and note that one of the key features in Rockman-Thompson syndrome is the absence of eyebrows. The patient used makeup to cover this feature. And still, the correct diagnosis was seen on rank 1. We also tested whether the algorithm works for younger patients, and we uploaded this patient who has George syndrome, and there we saw that the algorithm is not always getting the correct diagnosis on rank 1, but however, the correct diagnosis was seen on rank 9. This is a particularly interesting patient because he has Smith-Lemley-Opitz syndrome, and some clinicians would doubt that there is a typical Gestalt for that feature, for that syndrome. However, the correct diagnosis was seen on rank 5. There's one issue to the algorithm. It will always provide you with a diagnosis. So we also uploaded healthy individuals, and in my case, for example, it suggested 2 syndromes associated with intellectual disability. Note that the second of these syndromes is Angelman syndrome, which is associated to a rather happy mood. Although I'm told that I'm a happy person, I'm pretty sure I do not have this syndrome. So how many patients did we upload in total? We tested the tool so far on 130 patients with a known confirmed molecular diagnosis. They comprise of 72 different syndromes, and nearly 90% of our cases had recognizable facial features. What was the overall performance then? 11% of our cases were correctly diagnosed in rank 1 by the tool. 21% of our cases were ranked to positions 2 to 10. 27% of our cases were ranked to positions 11 to 100, and in 41% of the cases the tool did not work. There are different reasons for the Gestalt match not to work. One is that it's not applicable. That is, there are not enough reference photos in the database, which for us was the main issue with the Gestalt match. And another one could be the syndrome has no typical Gestalt, so you cannot infer the diagnosis from the image. Or you use a bad photo. And it's also possible that although the tool should be applicable, it still badly ranks the correct diagnosis. FDNA also provides a feature match tool, which is a classical tool which takes a list of the patient's symptoms and signs and connects them to a list of differential diagnoses. Apparently, this tool works better than Gestalt match, but I already mentioned that the main cause for Gestalt match not to work was a missing syndrome mask. At our institute, we have a special research interest in patients with Marbury syndrome, and we also uploaded those. We're surprised to see that there is no mask. We, however, have more patients featuring this syndrome, and we wondered whether it's not possible to create a mask from them, and we learned that indeed it is. So you need around 30 photos of the patients with a known syndrome to create such a mask. And another point is that if you just look at the percentage of the performance, then feature match might appear better. When you look at the specific cases, you see that 67 cases were solved by both tools, 37 cases were solved by the feature match tool only, and 9 cases were solved by the Gestalt match only. So these cases would have been missed if you just tried a feature match approach. So once we've seen that the performance was quite good, we thought, why not using this tool to increase the diagnostic yield in exome studies as we performed them? So how do you analyze exomes these days? You take the exome of a patient and a list of his features, and you use some kind of gene match to find the suggestive diagnosis from the patient's exome, and you do something similar with the list of the features. And then you combine those later to get the correct diagnosis. However, everybody who is performing such a kind of analysis knows that sometimes it fails, and it's not as easy as one wishes to. So what do we suggest? Additionally, use a patient's photo. Analyze it with the Gestalt match, and then add this data to your pipeline. By doing so, we hope to then get the correct diagnosis. When we tested this, we did not have an exome for all our patients. That's why in some cases where we didn't have an exome, we downloaded an exome of a healthy individual from the 1000 Genome Project and reduced it to we downloaded the genome and reduced it to the exome. And then we spiked in the pathogenic mutation. I already mentioned how Gestalt score can help you improve the outcome of your feature match, but how can it help you improve the outcome of a gene match? So one way of performing a gene match analysis is using the COT score, which is a score that predicts the potential pathogenicity of a variant in your sequence data. We use this score on data which we took from the 1000 Genome Project, then reduced them to the exome and filtered them for rare variants that are affecting the protein level, so for potentially pathogenic variants. And then the plot would look like this. We also evaluated the pathogenic mutations of our patients, and that would be the plot for them. Indeed, the COT score can separate the two data. However, this separation is not perfect, and you would end up with some false positives and some false negatives. So in a specific case, this would mean your pathogenic mutation as a high CAT score. However, in the sequence of your patient, there are other variants that have even higher CAT scores. But if you add the Gestalt score to your information, only some of the variants in the genes which they are associated with will also have a positive Gestalt score. The idea is then that if you have strong support from both COT and Gestalt score, you can find the correct diagnosis. We did this for our patients, and it's indeed what you've seen. Most of the truly pathogenic variants pop into the upper right part of that figure. We trained the support vector machine to draw a decision boundary. And that's here. And indeed, most of the non-pathogenic variants plot between the axis and the decision boundary, while most of the truly pathogenic variants plot beyond the decision boundary. So, think of this Mensah patient you've seen earlier in that presentation. He was only ranked rank 5, but when you combine those approaches, the correct diagnosis is clearly seen in the plot, and it's ranked to rank 1. So this approach improves our performance, that's the idea. However, to create a classifier that is able to distinguish between truly and and falsely positive variants, we need by far more than 130 patients. And that is where we need your help. So how can you participate in our study? We would need a patient of yours together with the confirmed molecular diagnosis and ideally the exome. However, if you do not have the exome, we'd also take the pathogenic variant and we would simulate an exome as I have described it. You can gain a co-authorship, an extensive list of Gestalt matches, the cut Gestalt plot, and a further PCR for your clinical purposes. More information about our study is also available at FDNA's booth. So, if you wanted to participate in our study, how can you do it? If you're using the Face2Gene tool, in the near future there will be a button on their website. And if you click on Submit to Study, we will be provided with your performance data. I want to note that we do not get your image, just the diagnosis and on which rank the correct diagnosis was. And by doing so, we can increase our statistical data set. So to conclude, an automatized diagnostic is possible. It uses just facial image analysis. The Gestalt match detects characteristic features beyond the current clinical terminology. The Gestalt feature and variant scores convey non-redundant information. And the best diagnostic yield can be achieved by combining all available information. What is still ongoing is to improve our classifier. I thank you.
Thanks a lot for this nice presentation. Are there any questions? Please go ahead.
Joost from Nijmegen. Great talk. But I was not completely sure now how much the tool adds to the diagnostic yield of exomes. So can you give a percentage on that?
It's a very good question. We ask ourselves the same. And currently, as I mentioned, we are developing this classifier. And one thing is you need to choose for the correct model. So do you use a vector machine that's polynomial? Do you use a vector machine that's RBF-based and so on? And that's why I have to disappoint you. So far, we have no concrete numbers for this. But what we can already say is that it does improve the cases.
I also have a question. I think it's a gorgeous tool to help in the clinical diagnosis, even without the application for exome sequencing. But I bet that there is also a lot of population stratification should be corrected by ethnics. Wouldn't it be better if you do like in genomics trio analysis, comparing the features of the child with the parents or the sibling, and would it be more helpful for the final diagnosis?
Okay, I take this as two questions. One question is, what about the ethnic background of your patients? And the other question is, cannot a trial approach improve our data? So the first question is true. If you think of my image, which is I'm of African and Central European descent, and this may have distracted the algorithm. I know that it's true that it does this because the algorithm is trained on European samples. But we are confident that if you add more non-European samples to the training sets, it will also be able to recognize those. We know that there's actually a study going on that does this very thing for African babies with Down syndrome, and now the program is also able to diagnose them. Another thing is the trial analysis. Of course, the trial analysis will improve your diagnostic yields, as it always does. So this is just one part of a pipeline, and the trial analysis will always improve your pipeline.
Utrecht University Medical Center, Utrecht. I was wondering, you have several variants where there's a high Gestalt score and a high CAT score. Could these not be modifiers?
So, modifiers of each other.
Or contributing to the phenotype, but not yet known.
It's true. That's a question we ask ourselves too. The problem is our data set is so far not big enough to answer this question because in some cases we simulated the exome. And that means not in all cases the exome we analyzed belongs to the image we analyzed. And that's why we cannot ask the question whether these are modifiers in a retrospective study. We are going to address this by using prospective approach.